Welcome everyone who's joining us, and just give us a few more minutes. We'll let more of a crowd in. We'll start pretty close to 4:30. So grab your glass of whatever you need and make yourself comfortable. We'll have a lovely time together. It's always so fun to see the room populate, even though we don't get to see your shining faces. We're thrilled to see you all here. This is usually when my cat tries to come across the screen. Luckily, I'm at the bookstore tonight. No cats. Again, thank you all for your patience. Just give us another couple of minutes. We're letting a few more participants in. And then we'll get started in just a minute or two. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. It's me talking for a few minutes, and I'm certainly the least important part of tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. We are thrilled to be here in these last few days of April, National Poetry Month. We're going to be sharing a couple of our favorite local poets with you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kim Bissell. I'm one of the co-owners of Broadway Books. And after a few tech pointers and reminders, I'll introduce our honored virtual guests. At the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see several icons, and you're welcome to join the chat at any time with your comments and questions. The Broadway Books team will be checking for questions from all of you in the Q&A section as well. So if you have questions for Brittney or Charlie, go ahead and enter them there. We'll also be posting links to where you can find each of the collections we'll be talking about tonight. We encourage you to purchase a copy or 10 to support these wonderful poets, as well as our little independent bookstore. We will be recording this presentation, and you'll be able to find it available on our YouTube channel and from the Broadway Books website after today. While you're visiting our YouTube channel, be sure to check out some of our other events from this unusual year, which continues as we will be hosting another local phenom, Whitney Otto, on May 10th. She'll be reading and discussing her new book, Art for the Ladylike, which was published by Mad Creek Books. In this inviting blend of biography and memoir, Otto examines her life in terms of the women artists who influenced her. She limbs the lives of 8 pioneering women photographers: Sally Mann, Imogen Cunningham, Judy Dater, Ruth Orkin, Tina Modotti, Lee Miller, Madame Yvonne, and Greta Stern, to in turn excavate her own writer's life. And now for the show. So again, just a quick reminder, if you've got questions for Charlie or Brittney, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, or just join us in the chat and say hi. So I'm going to introduce them now. In this new collection, Breaking, Brittney Corrigan finds the words to respond to the tragedies and heartbreak of life. This wonderful collection is her third, with a fourth releasing this fall. She's been nominated for the prestigious Pushcart Poetry Prize and won the Neocani Mountain Poetry Prize this past February. And while reading several of these fresh and thoughtful poems, I feel that Brittney has touched my emotions and words floating around in my head, and I'm so thankful to hear her read tonight. And for those of you who've had the chance to join us in the store, not virtually but actually live, you may have noticed our impeccably curated used section full of treasures beyond compare. We can thank our dear Charles Seluzicki for this book love. All of us at Broadway Books look forward to his regular visits as he shares his insight on poetry and literature, and for me in particular, his love of food and cooking and music. Tonight, he'll share with all of us his poems of heartbreak and loss and a perfect pairing with Miss Corrigan. We have been impatiently waiting for this new poetry collection and are thrilled that he has agreed to read for us all. So let's get to it. Broadway Books is thrilled to present Brittney Corrigan and Charles Seluzicki.
Thank you. I am very grateful to you, Kim, and to Sally for hosting us. And I also want to say that I'm very grateful to my publisher. This little collection, this chapbook, is the inaugural volume in the Cox Family Poetry Chapbook series. And there are already 2 other collections lined up. So it's an interesting concept to me, because as a person who has made a career of buying and selling, in large part, poetry, the chapbook has always had a special place in my heart. It allows for coherent groups of poems in less than book length collections, and these few poems in this chapbook have actually been composed over the period of some 7 years. I want to say something about the elegy before I read a couple of the poems. All those years ago, I found myself in a situation where every time I turned around, another friend or dear colleague had passed. And at some point, it became almost too much to deal with. And I needed to figure out how to deal with this sense of loss and this sense of grief. Fortunately, my good friend Paul Merchant and I, pre-pandemically, had been having lunch maybe once every 4 or 6 weeks. And one of the things that I have drawn on with Paul is that I was going through a period, which continues, where I was fairly obsessed with ancient Roman poetry from Catullus to the present, and came to realize something that wasn't original to me, but something that I hadn't really thought of quite, and that is that Catullus is actually considered the first modern poet. And he's considered that because he leaves the world of gods and goddesses and actually talks about personal issues. So the elegy, as it evolves through the years, is actually first finds its form by the Romans, by Catullus and Horace, and a host of others. So we had been reading them, and Paul has a profound knowledge of Latin, the poems in the original. And so I feel like he provided me with a set of very specific tools to express myself. And Kim, I was interested in your remarks about a kind of cohesion, a kind of connectedness that you felt between my collection and Brittney's collection, and I think that I could put words to it, because in the elegy, we have the opportunity to actually address very specific issues in personal history. And it seems to me that, that Brittney takes that up to the national and international level, and there is a definite conjunction there. There's a sense in which, when I finished reading her book, I had the sense that this evening's reading has a kind of a sense of completion about it. I would like to start reading the first three poems in the collection. Are actually the last poems that were written. This book took shape, like I said, over a long period of time. And by the time it achieved its final form, I understood that, like so many good things, I had created something like a journey in my poems, and there is a kind of conversation in which I am dealing with this sense of loss, and trying to achieve some kind of understanding, some kind of reconciliation. And so I feel like that little pattern it actually was fulfilled. So in any case, I relied on epigraphs for a number of the poems. The very first poem in the book is called "The Angel of Death," and the epigraph is from the great country songwriter Hank Williams, who did many sacred songs, and his poem is also titled "The Angel of Death." And the epigraph reads like this: "Can you truthfully say with your last dying breath that you'll be ready to meet the angel of death?" And that was a kind of perfection, because those who passed found themselves quite literally in that position. But all the friends and family around them also had to go through a certain meeting of their own with what was going on. The angel of death. "Wait, the angel of death has been busy of late, visiting upon the weary one by one, creating special forms of loneliness. His shadow visits multitudes. I do not attribute this to meanness. It is his job. Our problem is love and pity, robbed as we are of shared memory and time, and yes, suddenly solace. Echoes of how many voices, now softer, touch the heart, wind-fallen fruit sweetening the air, but you are not there." The third poem that introduces a series of elegies for individual people gives the book its title, Elegiac. And the epigraph is from Auden's great poem in memory of William Butler Yeats. "With the farming of a verse, make a vineyard of the curse." The reference to the fall in this poem is indeed the biblical reference of the fall. "How is it that a heavy heart appears the first requirement of art, and only after joy might forestall bits of sorrow in the wake of the fall? Death a curse? The shadows of words are ever present. They scold, and you all, yes, each and all, heard in every passing season a call." the series of poems for individuals also has yet another epigraph, and it's from A.E. Housman. And the line is simply townsman of a stiller town. Catherine Dunn was the novelist, Portland writer, was a very dear friend for many decades. And her passing came as quite a surprise to friends. It was very, very swift and quite a shock. She was a dear friend, and we had endless hours of conversation. Catherine Dunn. Sometimes I wondered how you did it. The loneliness, the bills, the moonlit burden of words carried through your day, the arts of motherhood and fiction played out off stage. You wiped your lenses the way marksmen fix their sights and considered the weight of words, bridling their animal fury, their deferred possibilities. Such eloquence, Catherine, is rare. Instead, your flair for uncertainty, cigarettes and coffee served you best, just as the mysteries of violence evidence the ever-mounting sense you continued to make of the world. It was your pleasure. You heard an echo of ideas ancient and near, freshly and with the reverence here in our time and place. I see once again the prescient pause, the silence, how reclaim the clarity, the freshets of breath, drawn through windowless veils of death. I'm going to admit sometimes reading these out loud brings a tear to my eye, so. A very dear old friend of some 40 years and a bookseller and a book collector, Jack Walsdorf, was someone who we shared a particular interest in fine press printing, and that's the reference to Morris, William Morris. The sadness that I make reference to at the end is the death of his son, which was a very tragic event and really hit Jack very hard. He went into the hospital for a back surgery, and people saw him in good spirits on that Sunday morning, and that evening he died very suddenly. Jack Walsdorf. Books were your pleasure completely. I never saw anything like it. Fleeting spectacles of innovation never deterred your devotion to Morris. It conferred the adventure of an aesthetic with grace, a way of life. Variety kept pace with tradition, beauty born of the crafts of the hand and the eye, the past renewed on the page. Aldous, Bodoni, Caslin, an alphabet of classic typography rekindled in the here and now. Your delight seemed inexhaustible, your smile impish and serene. How you reveled in the minutiae of the printer's art, the home team, all things Wisconsin and Oxford too. As a graver poised on engrain, your friendships were crafted, sustained, etched with that promise of permanence, honoring shared bonds, shared sense. Still, each of us bears a necessary sadness, and yours was great and then greater still. I never quite knew but came to know well. No one should ever have to lose a child. Your will seemed broken the last time I saw you, but I never thought that you might not pull through. I was surf fishing on the Oregon coast with my my publisher, Jerry Costanza, and I could not finish a poem. I just couldn't finish a poem about my friend of, again, since college, John Devlin. And we literally grew up together. And we too would go surf fishing. And I'm standing in the surf, and the final image of this poem finally came to me. I finally knew how to finish the poem. And so that's the reference to Assateague Island and this image of surf fishermen, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, surfing the incoming tide. John Devlin. Back when you and Peter still talked, he appeared amused and then sulked. My memory of how we had all met was backwards. Little matter now. Love bore names and grew even as things fell apart. We were not yet fully formed and learning how not to dream. The scene was Park Avenue. History played itself out through war and peace. The shadows of Zelda and Scott slowly erased by the fury of our time. Such immediacy robs youth of the romance of history. Still, surrender was never in the plan. How easy it would have been. A cigarette, a coffee, a pocket comb, a cold beer. The list is endless. The plumb line, your carpenter's tools. Oh, friend, I see you with your camera, your rod and reel, holding your daughter's hand. How to gather you up in a song. I want to ask, do you remember? Do you remember how we stood on Assateague shore, waiting for our distant company, wondering how the ocean knew to ravel and then untie our distant lore? The last poem that I'm going to read is called Lost Child. And it's the oldest poem in the book, written in memory of little Darcy Kane, who died of a rare childhood cancer at the age of 7 months. Sometimes in Lost Child, sometimes in autumn on street corners, sometimes at a broken place, the purposeless doors, sometimes the dust in a poor man's purse and how he pays with dust, which is memory. Sometimes a child will pass this way too soon, leaving only a fine trace, just touching air before settling out. So dust is a pity too. And still, Darcy, your name shines through. I think, are we closing in on time? That I will pass the baton, the poetic baton, along to Brittney. whose poems I very much look forward to hearing. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Charlie, for those really moving poems. I'm really honored to be reading with you today. And I just want to thank Sally and Kim for inviting us to read here together tonight, and to Ellie backstage for running all the technical stuff for us, and to Broadway Books in general for hosting us. I hope that you will support them tonight, either by buying my book, or if you have my book, by buying Charlie's book, or if you have both our books, to buying some other book that you've been wanting to buy for a long time, and supporting an independent bookstore. So I'm going to read to you just a handful of poems from Breaking tonight. So this chapbook is all poems that respond to events in the news over the past several years, and I will say that they're all pre-2020, so taking you back in time a little bit before there was a pandemic. So I'm going to open with a poem called Unflap, and this poem is after the female pilot who safely landed Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 with only one casualty on April 17th, 2018. Unflap, for Tammy Jo Schultz and the rest of us. When all the wide world is unhinged, not just the weather with its conniption of extremes, but also the cracking open of our species, the dark fringes scrabbling their way to light, that's when we most need the pilot, the level-headed timbre of her voice through the crisp altitude of air. It's not just 149 souls on that plane as it tilts and plummets. It's all of us reaching up for the oxygen masks, all of us trying to pull one another back in. We need how she navigates us through the turbulence of fear, how she calmly corrects to our destination, how she asks for everything we'll need. We are single engine and gaping, but we're not blazing yet. The pilot, she soothes, and we are bracing. We trust her while we descend. This voice, not angelic or steel, no, she's just human. But she's carrying all of us, the blue smudged to a blur, despair now clanking wildly at our ears. We are peeled open and falling, but she is what we need. A clear, sane winging back to earth. No, not all of us, but most of us. The gravity of our hearts plunging for what we've lost, gripping onto each other, remembering what's worth saving as the mess of us lands. All right, and this one is for the bombing that took place at the Boston Marathon on April 15th, 2013, in which 3 people were killed and several hundred others were injured. And that took place during a week when I work at Reed College, and a much smaller thing was happening outside my window during that time. Stellar's J, the week of the Boston Marathon bombings. The young cat whose life I saved carries a Stellar's J in his mouth, the blue form limp on either side of his jaws. He runs, tail bristled and tabby fur, a wild brown streak into the azaleas. The red of the azaleas, the blue of the bird, almost beautiful, until the jay's mate dives after them in a cacophony of grief and bravery and alarm. And now a ghost jay settles on my shoulder. I am in part responsible for this rending. Some woman births the murderer, the shooter, the bomber, the one who shatters lives like a shockwave pulsing from his center as he walks into this classroom, that theater, this crowd. Maybe someone tried to save him. Maybe someone tried to patch him up, fed him a good meal, raised him up into the world with her hands. She would still run to him now, still gather him into her arms, rock him like a child, no matter what is lashed to his chest, no matter what he has done, no matter what he still may do. My young cat is just a cat. He is supposed to hunt. He is supposed to take lives daily, licking his snout and preening his fur. But on this day, my heart presses wildly at the walls of my chest as the jay mate whirls and paces the air, screeching, crying. Somewhere below him in the azaleas, the she-bird is broken open by a creature I tended and released. Somewhere behind him in the trees, the little jays call from their nest, their blue mouths open, the blue sky falling all around them through the leaves. Sorry, some of these are probably so sad, and there's a lot of sadness in here, but I think it's important to call attention to it and sit with it. So this one is called Trophy, and this is after the death of Cecil the lion in Zimbabwe's Hwenge National Park at the hands of trophy hunter Walter Palmer. And that was on July 1st, 2015. Trophy. Awake all night as the ribbon of moon glow trails across the walls. They stare at each other carefully, as if this were the watering hole, small lappings and drags assembling in the summer dust. Curve of tusk, twist of horn, arch of muzzle and snout and snarled jaw. One glass eye searches out the next, phantom limbs almost shimmering behind their mounts, pelts and skins and hides aching to cleave back to bone. All of their yearning turns to light when the beast is brought in, his head lifted up like a sun. And they are made still in the shock of his black fringed mane, the heft of his massive skull, the terrible empty space that follows behind. The eland and oryx swivel and flex rigid ears. The wildebeest quivers a fly from its brittle neck. The leopard's sleek spots seem to rise and fall in the dim. Their ghost bodies quicken and heave as the lion is fastened and hung. The man licks his lips, bares his perfect teeth at the stiffened room, leans his gun against the fireplace frame. And the animals shudder and taste the scent of what stalks in the urban veldt, a reckoning, the savage kingdom come. So this one was written after the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, April 15th, 2019. And that fire happened just a week after the release, after the first photographic image of a black hole. And if you haven't seen that, you should go look it up. It's pretty amazing. Event Horizon. It has a little epigraph. We have seen what we thought was unseeable. And that's Shep Doleman, the astronomer who captured that first image of a black hole. The cathedral is a light with flames, scaffolding squaring itself against the coming dark. The spire skeletons to the point of no return, a star collapsing on itself, gravity sinking the collective watching hearts. Distant stonemasons evaporate as their mathematics flare and singe. Rafters, once saplings in centuries no one can fathom, ignite and ghost up in smoke, though the tiny angels of bees somehow ascend. Bloom of rose windows, portals to their makers, or to God, or to what was once thought eternal, are rimmed in a warp of red. We cannot see beyond what may or may not be spared, gargoyles cupping blackened maws in crumbling hands. Shadows of poets and peasants, emperors and hunchbacks and saints buttress the bell towers with bodies spectral and aglow. Pietà among charred debris, relics and artifacts buried out in a human chain. The crown of thorns travels from one gloved hand to the next, a ring of light escaping the ashen black. We are pulled to the burning horizon. We can see it now, brilliant and massive and bright. Three more for you. And this, folks in this region of the Pacific Northwest will remember this one. This is the carrying, and it's for the mother orca, Telequa J35, who carried her dead calf for more than 2 weeks near the San Juan Islands in July and August of 2018. And that was happening while immigrant families were being separated at the US border with Mexico. And the epigraph is, grief and love don't belong to us. We share it with other animals. Barbara King. The carrying. We cannot see to the bottom of a heart pulled up with loss, or chart the weight of what is empty, its heavy press. What we see is the dead orca calf balanced on its mother's rostrum, how deep she dives to retrieve it each time it falls off. We watch the circular surfacing of the female whales keeping vigil near the moonlit cove, lapped by the Salish Sea. We dare not take the orca calf away. Fiercely, we protect this ritual of carrying, empathy surfacing in our veins. We can say she's pushing through a 4-knot current with labored breaths. We can say her baby has been dead 4 days. When we say this, the blood in our own hearts leadens. The orcas are better than we are at buoying up our own. We watch how the human mothers carry their children from harm, endangered hearts pulsing with fear and love. We can say they are pushing through forbidden borders with labored breaths. We can say they have been traveling for days. What we see is the children wrenched from their mother's arms, the families in a tight circling, the sinking to their knees. The mother whale falls behind the others. We see her and weep. The tide is against us. The children slip and slip and slip away. So somewhat related. This next one is written after the border wall construction that happened at the site of the National Butterfly Center in Mission, Texas, and that was happening in February 2019. And for those who don't know, the center is home to about 240 species of flies, and it's situated across the threshold of the US-Mexico border in the Rio Grande Valley, along with several other sacred sites and endangered wildlife habitats. Sanctuary. May we not be detained before we exchange our many wearied feet for the paper of wings. Instead of a wall, let there be a chrysalis, emergent shell our bodies make so we may safely eclose. A barrier by any name scars the liminal milk-weeded ground where our dead dissolve and the river eats our thirst. Do not come with your slice of machines, your monster of unscalable steel morphing in our hammock of trees. Let our liquid imaginal cells become the possibilities of color unfolding as we reassemble what makes us whole. Let not the land be divided, nor the silken clutch of our bodies, nor our hearts that hang and twist in the fight. And I'm going to leave you on an uplifted note after all of that, because I don't think you can take any more. So this is a good one. There's a few really positive, happy events in this book, and this was one of them. And so this is after the first all-female spacewalk that happened outside the International Space Station on October 18th, 2019. And this is called Astro Sisters, which is what those the female astronauts referred to each other as. Astro Sisters. On the earth that passes beneath, leaves brighten, nova-like in the cooling air, and young girls ready their costumes for Halloween. Growing bones step into flight suits with embroidered names, Transparent globes frame buoyant faces freckled with stars. Miles above, two women navigate the space station in weightless calm, their voices tethered to the woman in mission control who talks them through each task, each measured step to power the solar arrays. Like the pace of this spacewalk, we have come to this moment slowly, when the women do their work in the universe and their male crewmates look out through the glass. As the Astro Sisters climb their way back into the airlock, Girl Scout troops are rapt with attention. Teenage girls in physics class follow the live stream on the miracles of tiny screens in their palms. And the little daughters, not yet in school, watch as the hatch door opens. And where once there was darkness, now there is infinite space. Thanks so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Brittney, and thank you so much, Charlie. I'd like to invite Charlie back on the screen. And because you guys can't hear all the people in the audience, I will just speak for all of them. That was incredible. Thank you both so very much. Those were insightful and beautiful and moving, and you're lucky that I can still talk because I was over here weeping through most of that. I'm going to start off selfishly with a question that I'm curious about. I know both of you have daughters, and I was wondering if you could just take a few minutes to talk about the roles that your daughters played in each of your books. And maybe Charlie, you want to start off for us?
My daughter's photograph is on the cover of the book. What in the world can I say? Let me see if I can hold mine up.
Oh, it's because mine's blurry. There you go. That's beautiful. Thank you, Charlie.
And what can I say? Just the experience of having wonderful children. Christine is my oldest, and she's someone who we've always been in a conversation about what we're doing, and she's always been very supportive, and I can only say that I'm grateful. She took that photograph years ago when we were on a trip in Paris, and we were visiting the great cemetery Père Lachaise, and she had gifted me a beautiful handcrafted book of her photographs from Père Lachaise. And my mind, as I was imagining this book becoming a reality, my mind just went right back there to that little collection which I pulled out and selected this image. So Paul Merchant, when he first saw this image, he said, "Wow," he said, "it almost looks like there's a branch growing out of her hand." He said, like Daphne in classical literature. And so that sense of rebirth and reconnecting to the earth. So I was very grateful for that insight, and I love the way those things come together.
Well, it's definitely a beautiful cover. And Brittney, you address your daughter specifically in many of your poems. Why don't you talk a little bit about your inspiration there?
Yeah, so my answer is going to be somewhat complex, actually. So I will say that after the book was accepted for publication, my kiddo came out as non-binary and no longer identifies as a daughter. And so I think that the poems that when I wrote these poems, I think they would be different poems now in many ways, but there are poems in the book that deal specifically with like what it meant to have a woman running for president and what it meant when she wasn't elected and what it meant to take my kiddo to the Women's March after Trump was inaugurated. And so that was definitely part of what went into these poems, being the mother of, at that time, a daughter. And so that certainly informed those poems. And I think now my kiddo's helping me see the world through a different lens. And I imagine these poems would be a little different now. And I probably have more to say about some other events that are happening, like the laws that have been coming out recently in Arkansas against medical care for trans youth and that sort of thing, which is now very near and dear to my heart. And so I think there's more of these poems to be written, and more fights we have to fight.
Well, that actually is very interesting, because it leads me into another question that was asked, and that is that this has been a very trying year filled with heartbreak and loneliness, and both of you wrote most of your poems prior to the pandemic, and but your work is being released in these still trying times that we're dealing with. How has this year changed your view of the work that you did, and how would you approach new work that is in progress right now based on the changing times?
I'm not so sure. You know, when your subject is loss, and you're just experiencing more and more of it, as we all have been, the world seems to be opening up a little bit more now. I just continue to find the spirit that informed these poems to be true to our time. So that's the short version of that.
And Brittney, what would you say going forward? Your stories have been prompted by news events. I mean, your poems. Did you start with the poems and then choose the news events, or did the news events lead you to the poems? And do you think you're going to continue down that path of writing poems that are inspired by news events?
So yeah, the news event led to the poems, and it wasn't a kind of a poetry I had ever come to before. And I had written just a handful of them, and then there was a call for chapbooks through Rattle, which I had written some of these poems specifically to submit to Rattle magazine, which has a feature called Poets Respond, which is a weekly feature, and you can submit a poem on Friday that has to do with something that happened in the news that week, and then they pick one on Saturday and they publish it on Sunday. So it's very fast and very so I had written a couple to submit to there and a couple that were published there, and then they put out a call for a chapbook, and I was like, I wonder if I have enough of those. and I found that I did, and so it sort of came together accidentally. And it wasn't really the kind of poems I thought of them as, like political poems, or it wasn't really what I wrote before. I wrote a lot of more sort of confessional poetry, or and so then I'll say the project that I just finished now, while it's not in response to specific news events, what I started writing about during the pandemic, and I did write some pandemic poems, but I started writing more about issues of climate change and the Anthropocene age and extinction, and found that I had a lot to say on that subject, and that's sort of where my current interests and poetic leanings are right now.
Well, it certainly makes for a great poetry prompt to use the news. I like that idea. Yeah. Charlie, were you going to say something?
Chime in a bit. As a child of the 60s, the notion of political poetry was a very lively subject. And I really grew up watching transformative poems that started to be written by the likes of Denise Levertov and Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde. Those poems very, very much influenced the way I looked at the world and helped me to process. And so this is a whole element, Brittney, that was informing my reading and my enjoyment of these poems, because your encounters with these events, there's nothing predictable about them. They're very lively.
Well, and one of the other things I really liked about them, Brittney, is your approach is kind of, it's not always straight on, it's this way. Like when you're writing about someone birthed the murderer, birthed the bomber, birthed the, you know, and then you let loose the creature that, you know, that's when I read the news, that's not always what I think about. And you kind of took a personal approach to it that I think really made the news story a much more personal event. And which leads to a question from somebody in the audience. Ariana Kramer is asking, Brittney, how did you choose which stories to highlight in covering in writing your poetry collection, and what drew you to those particular stories?
So again, I think they kind of chose me, and I didn't have a collection in mind. And so it would just sort of have, like, something would happen and I'd have something I wanted to say about it. And then, like you were just saying, Sally, like sometimes it came at me sideways. Like the Boston Marathon bombing happened and I wanted to write something about that, but I couldn't figure out how to say it. And then that incident happened with this cat and this bird, which is, you know, and that was like, I was like, that's my way in, you know. And so sometimes I was finding my way in by the way it was affecting me personally. And so I wasn't, I guess, actively seeking news events to include in a book. I didn't really have a book in mind, but there was just a lot. And then there still is. There's huge events happening in the world. And part of how I deal with things that are upsetting or difficult or just feel overwhelming or big is to write about them. And then the personal comes into that as a way to sort of process that and figure out what am I going to do about that, or what do I have to say about that, that then hopefully becomes meaningful to other people as well.
Well, it's definitely meaningful to me, and I think to the people in our audience, and it's interesting too, because you sort of take the national and international events and personalize them. And then Charlie, you kind of are going the other direction. You're starting with some things that are very, very personal. You're paying tribute to loved ones and then sort of making a broader statement, a grander statement about it. So how did you approach writing these tributes to people that, you know, were such a personal love in your life?
You know, honestly, as a person who has been a closeted writer for a long time, back in the 70s.
You're out now.
I know. I'm going back in after this. In the 70s, early 70s, I spent a couple of years writing and submitting poems, and I knew how much work it took to be a poet, a writer, who was producing work of the sort that consistently provided, you know, the kind of experience that I admired in the great writers that I admired. And so after a couple of years and a few publications in some pretty good places, I just stopped. I just sort of withdrew, and the writing became much more private. And once in a while, I would share something with a writing friend. But I can only say that when you see me using particular epigraphs, and you know the history that I have with poetry, I just take a cue from the past. I know how I want to interact, how I want to have this conversation with someone who has passed. And then it's just a matter of reflecting on years of acquaintance and years of friendship. You know, I can't I don't think I can give a better answer than that.
I think that's a brilliant answer. You're all good. Well, again, I think Kim really nailed it when she said at the beginning that when we paired the two of you, we didn't really grasp just how great a pairing this was. I mean, I do really love the way you both approach dealing with significant events, personal and public, and personalizing the public ones and publicizing the personal ones. And I just think it's a really beautiful pairing. And I want to thank you both so much, both for your beautiful poetry and especially for participating in this event tonight. And I'm just going to put right one more time in the chat box. That is our link to the YouTube channel, which will have this event on it momentarily. It also has our event with John Morrison and Kim Stafford. That was last Monday evening, if you missed that. And last month we had an event with John Brehm. So all of our events, our virtual events, are on that YouTube channel. And to you attendees in the virtual audience, thank you so much for coming. I just have to say one last thing. Last Saturday was Independent Bookstore Day, and I tell you, we really felt the love both virtually and in the store, and we so appreciate all of your support. We actually felt like a bookstore again on Saturday. It was a pretty amazing experience, and we were about halfway through getting all of our staff vaccinated, and once that happens, we're hoping we can open up a little more broadly and really be a real bookstore again. So again, thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Brittney. And thank you to the audience for coming tonight. We really appreciate it.